Hi, this is Nee. I'm the Marketing and Communications Specialist at CARE.
I'm Melissa. I'm one of the Violence Prevention Coordinators at CARE, and you are listening to The Narrative Project.
Hello everyone, Nee here with Melissa and some amazing colleagues to talk through our 5th episode of The Narrative Project within a Zoom meeting room. Before we get into what we will be talking about today, I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves, their pronouns, if they would like, and a quick description of ourselves and our Zoom background. I can go ahead and start. My name is Nee. I am the Marketing and Communications Specialist at CARE. I use she and her pronouns. I'm calling from Irvine, California. I'm currently wearing a green cardigan and a white top, and I'm currently using one of the Zoom background UCI provided. We see a lot of red flowers and a big building on the back.
My name is Melissa Bader-Huskin. I use they, them pronouns. I am a violence prevention coordinator in the CARE office. Right now, I am sitting in front of what looks like a grayish purple kind of wall. You can see a little bit of a painting of the buildings. You can't see the buildings, but you can see the frame of the painting behind me and some pillows. I'm calling from Mission Viejo, California. I am wearing a green shirt that beautifully unplanned matches Nee's green cardigan. And I have light blue glasses, short blonde hair. And yeah, that's me.
Hi, I'm Kayden. I use they, them, and he, him pronouns. I'm calling from Tustin, California. I'm a 4th-year undergraduate student with a major in film and media studies and a minor in queer studies. And I'm also a student intern working with engagement and social media outreach at the Women's Hub. My Zoom background is a tapestry of the moon with the ocean and some water and some mountains, and it's pretty mystical. I am wearing round glasses, purple lipstick, and some pom-pom earrings, I guess I would describe them as, and I have short black hair.
Hi, my name is Cheng. My pronouns are he, him, they, and them. I'm one of the counselors from the Disability Service Center. I'm currently wearing a gray shirt, black glasses. My hair is slicked back right now because it's growing. I haven't gotten a haircut. I am an Asian male. And my background that I have is a picture frame with my wife and I's wedding. And the other is another picture frame with all the national parks that you can scratch off that reviews a different image in the background.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I'm very excited for us to get started in our conversation today. We're going to explore and discuss how culture plays a role in the way that each person navigates the world. And so with this in mind, we also want to recognize that there's really only a few folks discussing this topic in this Zoom room, and we may not cover all of the different contexts, different cultures, different definitions that encompass the various people that make up our UCI community. And so please keep that in mind, that it's only a snapshot of the conversation, and we encourage you to delve into these topics with folks around you as well to continue this conversation going.
Starting off with the first question, what does culture mean to you?
Definitely a broad question. It's something that you don't necessarily want to always generalize, but for myself personally, I'm Black and multiracial, and in my personal experience with culture, it can be very difficult where it's you don't want to just fit into one box, but more often than that, people kind of decide for you what role you play by how they view your identity. And that can be very confusing and a struggle. And I know that for many multiracial people, there's this constant struggle of trying to fit into one identity per se, but you are not one identity. You are multiple identities, and they all intersect together. But there's this constant struggle of enoughness. And this is something that I tend to bring up a lot, which is this concept of being enough, in which you are enough within all those identities. But more often than not, many people don't seem to recognize that.
Kayden, what you said about enoughness
Reminded me of this conversation I had with someone. This person was talking with their own experiences being multicultural and identifying with different race. And so they said, I'm often told that you're only half this and half that. And so you can't understand this culture or this experience because you don't really represent the entirety of it. And what was beautiful about the conversation we had was when they said, you're not half this, half that. You are whole. You are a whole of this, and you're a whole of that identity as well. You're not just a fraction of one cultural identity or racial identity. I appreciate that you shared that, and it reminded me of that conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that experience as well, because that's one of the parts with being with different groups of people and finding other multiracial folks where we can have this sort of sense of healing together and knowing that we are whole.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. For me, I mean, a lot of things about culture is you get to learn different things. You don't have to identify as one, I think of it as a puzzle. Not every puzzle piece is the same. They all fit together to make one beautiful picture or structure. And, I'm Chinese and Korean. Those two within itself is a battle because they have different traditions, food, clothing, but also people tend to forget race and culture are two different things. They're not the same thing. A lot of people blend them together. For me, culture helps you become a better person. You get to learn different things uniquely about another person or a friend, and you get to incorporate that in your own beliefs and help kind of make you flower into a better person. But those things are just a part of a lot of things that make up your identity. Like you said, it's not one or the other. For me personally, I grew up around a lot of African American people. It was very hard for me to tell my family why I like rap, why I like basketball. And I was like, well, basketball isn't an African American thing. It's just African Americans play it. But I like the rap hip hop culture, the food. I went to a lot of my friends' churches that were African American because the feel and the vibe was different, but didn't mean I thought of anyone else less. But it was to help broaden my horizon and compare things to and learn, kind of like with food. You miss out on so many good things if you don't open your eyes and try it. You may not like it, but you can find a respect for it. And so a lot of times, it's hard when I talk to family members, especially older ones, hey, auntie, hey, grandma, race and culture are two different things. You can have somebody who is born white, live in Korea, and follow every cultural tradition that a lot of Koreans here in the States don't follow. And I would say they're more culturally Korean than someone here. And you can see that on YouTube. There's people who speak Chinese, Korean, Japanese, French, who are from all different cultures. They're intertwining it with themselves and, broadening the horizon. So culture is just opening your eyes and adapting and learning and growing to me.
I think you talk about something, Cheng, that is important to recognize too with culture is there's these two components, and you hit on this too, Kayden, of the component of you experiencing your culture and you learning a culture and embracing it and understanding it and kind of incorporating things into your life, whether that's based off of what you're learning from someone sharing their culture with you or being taught your culture by loved ones. And then there's also this aspect that can be also tied in with culture of how the world is viewing you, where there is this common understanding with specific cultures of this is how the world is viewing this group of these stereotypes or these systems that are built to prevent folks from being able to do things or that are built to create opportunities for certain folks. I think about that a lot in the way of how you have these two competing pieces where race and culture are not the same, and the way people are viewing your race and viewing your culture and the way that you're viewing it might look different. And that impacts the way that you're going to walk through the world as well.
Yeah, I think you hit that right on the head, because I tell people I'm Chinese, then they ask me are you Cantonese and Mandarin? Then I'm like, oh wait, well, I'm Taiwanese. And so there's even within Chinese culture, there's tiers like Chinese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Taiwanese, people who are from Hong Kong. And then I'm also Korean too. So it's you're battling with justifying yourself to other people. And I'm very dark compared to a lot of Asians. I mean, if you follow K-pop or anything, a lot of the males are white. But that's more of a status thing, because if you're pale white, it means you don't work outside. But here in America, I go to the beach every day. I love being outside. I go camping, hiking. So it's they look at you differently, and it's a shame because you missed out on something that someone could teach you or share. And so like that piece is really hard. They look at your race. I've been called names more than enough by people in my own culture, like Twinkie, because they saw me as yellow outside, but they thought I was like a white person. And I was just like, I have no idea what that meant or how that even is a thing, because I like doing things like playing sports and being outside that made me like a Caucasian person. But there are people who do that across the world, who do that stuff. So it's hard battling with that. And then especially people at young age, they're not in this world long enough to understand you can have both. You can have multiple things, because people are telling, oh, you have to be this way. You can't wear purple lipstick. Heck no. People pull off purple lipstick. I mean, I wouldn't be able to, but like, Kayden, great. Yeah. Like everyone has their little niche that does things. I also have tattoos too. And then people see that like, oh, you're Asian, you're not supposed to have tattoos. But these tattoos mean things to me. If you learn about other culture, tattoos are like artifacts of meanings in their lives. It's passing down history. I think sometimes they want the shortcut. Let me find the easiest way not to have to think more about you. And that's, again, where stereotypes come from. You're Asian, you should follow X, Y, and Z. You're African American, you should follow. And that's, to some people, are the easiest way to do things and not have to put some cognitive stress on yourself to find out who this person is, what their interests are, what their background is. Without understanding someone's context and looking at the beauty of stuff, we miss out on a lot of things. I think people do that too often nowadays.
I think there's like a lot of like people make assumptions very quickly about like identity, but like at the same time, I think there's like how you were talking about earlier about how there can be a lot of like cultural appreciation and stuff as well, where like people can like enjoy like each other's like foods and like have conversations about that, and that can be very healing. But like at the same time, I think it walks like there's a fine line between cultural appreciation and appropriation, and that is something that is unfortunately crossed a lot. And like I think that's like very interesting, where like there's been like a phenomena like recently with a lot of like different like celebrities where like they've been basically like in a way like performing in like a way of like blackface and appropriating like culture, and it's pretty blatantly there, but it's becoming like more and more accepted into mainstream. And that like kind of like made me look back into like how you're talking about like K-pop idols and how there's still this like type of like traditional expectations like found. But then again, other celebrities go on like the opposite, where it's like they, rather than like appreciate the culture, start appropriating it, when there's other people that are still denied like certain rights and ability to even like explore and wear what makes them like comfortable culturally. And I think that's like an issue that doesn't get like talked about enough.
Yeah, food is like easy to talk about because it's food. Sometimes it's not controversial, but like when you think of clothing, like styles, religious ceremony, like yeah, that's when people, and some of these people do it not to understand truly a culture, but to gain financial resources, or to become famous some way, and not in the true right way of learning about a culture. Because there are some Asian cultures, like when you go to Korea, they want you to wear their traditional garbs when you're like with certain people. But those people who are there sometimes are there just to really experience, they immerse themselves in it. And there are some people that just want the Instagram famous, like I wore this, but then they'll go make fun of somebody who's wearing it out in public in like the States. And so it's like they pick and choose when it's a good thing and a bad thing, which is unfortunate, because it should be a positive thing. Like, if someone wore a traditional outfit here or wherever, it should be like, hey, that's your culture, you're sporting it, great. Fortunately, people can't see that difference and, use it to benefit them but hurt others.
Kayden, I just remembered something that you mentioned earlier and how you see a lot of people doing blackface. It reminded me of like what's been trending, like things that are ongoing. And one of them is like, it happened maybe like recently where models will do box eyes where they stretch their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it becomes you're using features, specifically Asian features, and then making it a trend.
I've seen so many like quote unquote like edits or like challenges and stuff where it's like they'll literally like edit their like eyes and face to like appear more like a certain like cultural identity. It's really like strange and like harmful where it's like it's been sort of like popularized. They often like try to argue that this is a part of appreciation, but at the same time it's like when you are a part of a culture that like is still inflicting like basically a type of like power play and like dominance, like that is what is harmful. When you are like a colonial like settler and you decide, hey, let me just take this as well and use this but still shame you, where it's like some people like still can't like get like jobs or like proper like help and aid just because of their racial identity, but then you go ahead and say, oh, but like me wearing your culture. I think also like as Halloween's coming up, that's actually a good thing. Not to go too off topic, but it's on topic. Culture is costume, and like how people try to be like, but like it's funny, like let me dress up as your culture for Halloween and like treat it as like, but like I'm just joking. But it's like it's not funny. Like culture is not costume. Stop trying to like be like, oh, but I want to look like exotic or whatever, and it's like that's not okay in any capacity.
And that's kind of like the line, like where do we even draw the line when people are unwilling to see or even have a conversation about that? And it made me think back to what you said, Cheng, about how when you're growing up or when people talk to you, someone called you a Twinkie, and it's like on topic, off topic, similar to what you said, Kayden, but just making me think like, why is it that certain actions are deemed as like, this is for this race, and you're not fitting that, and if you're not doing that, you're not Asian enough or you're not this.
They expect you to still commit to like a certain role, and when you like fit outside of that role and expectation, they get upset because it's like obliterating all of their previous preconditioned ideas. And I think like for myself personally, along with being Black and like multiracial and non-binary, where there's also not just the expectation of to fit into like my racial and cultural roles, but to also fit into gender roles as well. And what does that look like when like you don't fit into specific like connotations of like gender identity either, but then there's still like a pressure, especially for like Black women, where it's like there's this expectation and pressure and stigma of like hyper masculinity. So then where is that when you're like non-binary, where it's like these pressures and gender ideas are still being placed upon you because of your cultural identity, but you don't fit into either of those expectations.
This is a slight tangent, but I think also still on topic of how all of these ways of like these expectations that are being put on people, and kind of tying it with power-based personal violence, of this idea of like those expectations are then utilized to blame or to explain away these forms of violence. Also, there's a lot of minimizing that can happen there, of like, oh, well, because you did this, you don't fit into this culture identity, insert whatever you would like here. Therefore, this is okay. Or they probably didn't mean it like that. Also, these demeaning pieces. I think about, it was mentioned earlier with like culture as a costume. Like, oh, but I want to be exotic for a night. And then completely removing that from this history of the sexualization of women of color, and how that is not something that you can just like take off for a night. That is an experience that people are having on a regular basis. And so even if it is this idea of like, oh, well, this is just a really pretty hairstyle, or I think that this looks nice when I wear this outfit, you're not taking that historical aspect of there can be a lot of pain that comes with these pieces of someone's culture, because we can't separate the fact that people from different identities that share different cultures, some are put up on this pedestal that have power and privilege, and some are not. When we forget to take that into consideration, it continues to perpetuate those systems that allow folks to continue to cause harm.
Mm-hmm. And like there's a certain like ideological baggage that like comes with that like type of like intergenerational trauma that like continues to be carried. It just becomes like this frustration and battle. Certain people in these positions of like power are refusing to acknowledge what continued harm they are doing.
Yeah, that power play is such a huge thing. And it's unfortunate too that people like have started to pit other cultures against each other. I hate that idea when someone says, well, you're the model minority Asian stereotype. And I'm like, that's just like wrong. There are Asians Americans out there who are still being, treated unfairly, who don't move up. You don't hear about certain things because the news doesn't post everything. If they did, you would see there's a lot of things coming up, especially with this recent time with the pandemic. People of power will play on what will benefit them or another group, or to diffuse it from themselves. It's this whole victim blaming. It's your fault. You stood out of that stereotype. You were drinking past a certain time. When it's like, no, how is it my fault when the other person should have had the social responsibility of treating someone with dignity and respect? And instead of, people doing that, they blame it on someone else. Due to this pandemic lately, I've just been called horrible things, and people tell me like, hey, go back, take the virus away, it's your fault. And at this point in time, it's like, it doesn't matter where it came from, it's here. Every country is being affected. What can we do to improve it and make it better and make sure people aren't being treated unfairly? Certain marginalized groups are the ones who are passing on more so than other groups because they don't have adequate health care. They don't have somebody to drive them because they have to work and take care of this kid. Childcare isn't available. And so the power dynamic too of certain cultures, will pit one against another, but also will blame someone else for their shortcomings when, a lot of it isn't, their choice, it's the environment. In the culture of disability, one of the biggest groups that are marginalized, unfortunately, are African American females who have disabilities. Those statistics of anything like employment, healthcare, they're even more disproportionate than the groups of individuals who may have a disability. And people don't even know about that. The media doesn't cover it, or some people choose not to share that. And that's something I always point out to people. It's like certain groups, you have to look at their culture and their background and see where they're coming from and understand that people who are pushing them and keeping them in that area instead of letting them grow or understand where they're coming from.
Thank you, Cheng, for sharing some of those experiences. And I'm sorry that is the experience, but I just wanted to acknowledge that.
I'm sure all of you have gone through something too, and I'm assuming groups like us that are helping wash that away more and not just cover it or throw it under the rug, but bring it to light and speak about it. Even if you don't agree, at least understanding and seeing someone, that is a huge step for a lot of people too, that, I do appreciate.
I don't believe we had shared the same exact experiences, but it just reminded me of a conversation I had with some colleagues. I think, Mel, you were there too, when shelter in place started, I think around March. The language and the way that people framed COVID-19 and really pointing fingers at a specific community. People in specific leadership will say certain things that pushes other community members to believe that it's okay to be violent amongst other people and people who don't look like them. I remember running around my neighborhood and twice someone got really aggressive. I remember someone approached me and was yelling at me while I was running. And then same thing happened another time and they were cussing at me, and it just made me feel very fearful of the neighborhood I was in when I shouldn't have felt that way. It really speaks volumes to how important showing care and love and compassion, and how easy it is for things to shift when people frame specific communities of color as it's their fault. And we've seen it throughout history as well.
For me, it's a little some people are so engulfed in their culture, which is not a bad thing, but they can't see that there's another light of things. And, I understand if you're taught something, but you can also accept that certain things are not right. Power play is definitely something that shouldn't be used. I've heard the argument well, unfortunately, Black Lives Matter. People have been saying, well, why don't you worry about, Black on Black crime? That's not the issue at hand right now. The police have power. You're a police officer. That culture, police officer culture, is a different breed for some people, meaning that they feel like they have the power to do certain things or say certain things and intimidate people. And there are great cops out there. I've known plenty, and you know, there's culture within like the military culture. Like there's groups that all have their different type of culture. Worked with student athletes. There's that student athlete culture. People get so afraid, like I have to stay in my lane. If I branch out, I'm going to be not appreciated by my peers. I've heard someone say, I'm not racist. I like Asian people. I feel really bad for you. And I'm like, do you say it to your friends who do say wrong things? They're like, no, I'm just too afraid. That's not helping, because then that's perpetuating the power dynamic, and you could be that voice that changes it if they want to hear it. The fear is there too for people, and that they don't want to lose their power too. What can I do to keep my power but help others? And most people sometimes will say, I'm going to keep my power or my privilege. And that's the scary thing, that I just like worry that people are so in this little box mentality instead of realizing there's tons of different shapes out there.
I agree with like that, like in a partial way, where it's like, yes, like we all come from different experiences and different levels of like education. But like in terms of like talking about things and topics like Black Lives Matter, where it's like there is no agree to disagree for a question as simple as, do our lives like matter?
Yep.
And then on top of that, I also disagree. I don't believe there's good cops. I will be very honest about that statement, and I will stand by that, where there is a serious issue in our police system, especially for myself as a survivor of violence and domestic violence, where for myself, like there was a lot of arguments that I would see where people would be like, what if a person has like a domestic abuse charge, or like something is going on, who do you call? And I think that's why we need more resource spaces like CARE, where there's many like hotlines that are like sexual assault hotlines, but we need to fund more spaces for like social work, mutual aid. And like that's where our system is failing us. And that's why a lot of people want the police defunded. And there's a lot of conversation about like cops off campus and like things such as that. And it's because cops have not helped survivors. They've elevated and escalated situations so many times for so many people, and acknowledging and recognizing that is a part of the process. We stand with like cops like today, where it's like for folks to kind of say, oh, but like my uncle like is a cop and he's a nice guy, but I'm like, well, like your uncle may need to possibly reconsider their career choice, because blue lives are not real. Like that is not like real at all. And like I hate that being used within this argument, because it's always used to deflect on the issue being like said, where it's like, well, but like I know a good cop, or like what are you going to do in this situation if you can't call the cops? And yeah, certain times like certain people had no other options and they had to call cops, because the system fails again and doesn't offer better, safer options. And that's what we need to fight for in progress, better, safer options.
Yeah, I agree with you, like with that better option. Because I look at it when students, unfortunately, have to be placed on a psych hold. The first thing that happens is they get handcuffed.
Mm-hmm.
And that already right there is like a huge determinant for them to ask for help, because they feel like they've done something wrong, which they haven't. They're reaching out, and to be handcuffed. And then the answer I always get to is like, well, we're looking out for their safety. I'm like, you can make sure they don't have any weapons. It's going to be very difficult for them to harm themselves in a backseat of a police officer, or have your partner sit back there with them. There's different dynamics. And, that's a huge part too, that I really do, advocate. Was like training needs to be improved. Requirements need to be higher standard. I heard one station say they only require 40 hours of like crisis intervention. I was like, I have over like 2,000 hours before I could start seeing students.
Yeah.
You need 40 hours? 40. That's 1 week of training to defuse somebody. I thought about that social worker who was African American, who got shot by the police because he was comforting a student or a child who was having, I believe, a mental breakdown. And the police shot him. And I was like, he's a social worker helping. And so, like you said, that's right. If there was an agency to call, like CARE is like a great place to call for our students. We know as a student. And unfortunately, when you leave college, there is no CARE, or if there is, nobody knows about it, or they're super underfunded. where you're sitting on hold for like 30 minutes and then by then it's too late. You know, something severe could have happened, they've lost hope, other things. And so, you know, the funding piece is a huge factor, that priorities are not there. You know, we can spend millions of dollars on a missile, but we can't spend it on education, social worker.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, what's wrong? The priorities are wrong in that sense.
There's a huge cognitive dissonance, and it just causes more trauma. And like, it doesn't make sense, where it's like, there's so many other things that could be funded right now to help so many students of color and like just youth of color and people in like general, but instead it's being used to instill more violence and like escalate that violence.
Yeah, I think because like for us, the three or all of us are working in education, you know, we see things frontline, and then some people who make the decisions have never been in a public school setting, have been in private school, private tutors, you know, don't realize like, you know, Kayden, you're working and you're going to school and you're volunteering. It's another way of a system to weed out the have and have nots. You know, I view education as a great thing. Like, we could be totally missing out somebody who could cure cancer because they couldn't afford to go to school or eat.
Mm-hmm.
They can only get their bachelor's, but could have, if someone were able to help them a little bit more, whether it was like food insecurities or gotten them support from like a care office, could have developed cancer cures, different types of treatments. But we're missing out of that now for more generations because that prodigy was kind of just put on the wayside because you didn't fit this mold, you didn't have money, you didn't look this certain type, you know. And that's like a part that killed me. Is just like, you never know who's out there, you know. And I've had the experience of working with student athletes. They have their own stereotypes, and a lot of them have come from, you know, Compton, poor, and been told you're not going to graduate. Why even try? It's unfortunate because some of our greatest leaders have been able to, you know, fight it, but there are tons of others who didn't get that on because they didn't get that one person to push them to be that role model, you know, like, you know, Nii or Kayden or Melissa, like you, I'm sure you three are huge role models to a lot of those students who you hang around with or meet with. And even if you touch one person, that was still one more than we had yesterday. And, you know, there are some people, unfortunately, don't want to do that.
The way that I think and look at the world, my worldview is very much more in that big picture mindset. And I'm just thinking in our conversations of we're living in these systems, and it's these systems of power, and how each action that someone takes is either perpetuating that power system, is continuating, or is, I can't think of the word right now, but the opposite of perpetuating that system, breaking down that system. With it really comes with that idea of like, okay, so first being aware of who's being given power, why are they being given power, and then after you're aware of that, being able to kind of say, okay, now why not give power back to the people that have power being taken away from them? And really taking that step to be able to ask those questions that you were just talking about, Cheng, of like, why not empower people to be able to do what they want to do rather than tell them, oh, you can't do that because of XYZ reason. A lot of times we're just taught into how these systems are working, and we aren't even fully aware that we're contributing to them. As we kind of talked about at the very beginning, culture, you can't necessarily see it. It's really hard to be able to be like, this is the tangible thing. And so a lot of times these choices, we don't realize how they're contributing to those systems or taking away from those systems.
I just wanted to recognize that it is a lot of unlearning. We are learning and unlearning together as a community, and knowing that, you know, we all come from different spaces and navigate the world differently. So I appreciate you all for sharing your experiences and being in community today. I want to end this conversation that we had together with one question. What is the world that you envision?
There's so much I want. There's so much. What to even start with? I want everyone to have access and housing. I want everyone in a perfect world to just have accessibility, to be able to have actual liberation and choice, not liberation and choice under a system of like power dynamics and exploitation. I really want to see everyone have access to medical and be able to choose like their career for a real like passion, because I feel like a lot of us sometimes fall into like our passions not always because they are our passions, but because our passions can help keep our lights on and our like families like fed. And I want people to be able to have equal opportunities, like truly for like educational resources. And I know that's not going to happen immediate, because along the lines of like voting, where like voting right now is very important and that's like a stepping stone for change. But when your rights are like up against you like every 4 years, that's not an actual like radical change. Radical change stems from the working class people recognizing that we can aid each other mutually with community bearing and understanding. And like you said before, Nee, that comes with a lot of unlearning, and people are at different levels of education. That's something to always recognize. But I think there's a lot to envision for the future. And a lot of us have somehow like lost this type of hope because we're at a really, really hard time. But I think it's that hope in community mutual aid that helps us keep going. Aiding each other is really what it's about.
On the same wavelength with your vision, along with radical change, bringing in radical love as well, and really showing that authentically, whether it's through our experiences or like our time with our students, specifically me and my student, and really showing that in the best way I can, and really listening in. A world where my parents will not only feel safe, but feel like they are fully living and really not worried about similar things to what you said about like having lights, water, things like that. Really being able to be in community with people and really not just being intolerant of violence, but having no violence.
Both of your visions, Kayden and me, sounds lovely. And I want to live in those worlds with you. You just worded it so beautifully, Kayden, when we started this conversation of enoughness. I keep coming back to this. The world that I envision is really where it's enough. Like, I think about these conversations, these topics that we've kind of been able to dive into a little bit. It comes to this idea of like, okay, well, how do you prove that this is the experience that someone's having? How do I show you that I should be able to not have to worry about housing, or that I should be able to have my work and my passion be the same thing? It's this idea like there has to be proof that this is something that someone deserves. And I want us to be able to be in a world where you don't need to provide that. It's just enough. It's just enough. And you're enough. I think it also feeds into what you were saying, Nee, of like not just an intolerance of violence, but having a world where we are actively creating a space where violence can't even be a thought. There shouldn't be that underlying aspect of why violence shouldn't be happening towards a specific person or a specific group, but rather that just by existing, we all are enough to be able to create this world together.
And one thing for me is like the respect. Everyone should respect one another and appreciate each other, and to have a collaborative goal of making this world and society the best, where like everyone is treated for their uniqueness and as their beauty. There's only one world.
Thanks for tuning into the Narrative Project podcast.
We hope you all enjoyed the dialogue we had today.
Please remember, should you need support from the CARE office, please call us at 949-824-7273 or email us at care@uci.edu. Our services are available to UCI students, staff, and faculty members Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. PST.
The UCI Counseling Center is available at 949-824-6457 and offers 24-hour access to counselors by phone.
And for Waymakers 24-hour hotline, they can be contacted at 949-831-9110 in South Orange County or 714-957-2737 for North Orange County, and they can provide resources and referrals for survivors of sexual assault.
Human Auction's 24-hour hotline is available at 877-854-3594 and provides resources, safety, and support for individuals experiencing relationship abuse.
For those outside of Orange County, the National Sexual Assault Hotline can be reached at 1-800-656-4673 or through online chat at rainn.org. That's RAINN.org for resources and referrals for survivors of sexual assault.
And the National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached at 1-800-799-7233 or through online chat at thehotline.org. That's THEHOTLINE.org for resources and referrals for survivors of individuals experiencing relationship abuse.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please be sure to share it with someone you know and join us for our next conversation. Bye for now.